Cronos: The New Dawn is the newest survival horror title released by Bloober Team, the studio behind the recent Silent Hill 2 remake that blew all expectations out of the water, leaving many with bated breath to see if it could live up to the same standards. This project, however, is notably different, trading in the grounded narrative for a larger scope, sci-fi action vibe that focuses more on the gameplay. Though that's not to say that there is no narrative. Cronos: The New Dawn puts you in the shoes of the Traveler, an agent of a mysterious organization known as the Collective, tasking the player to survive the brutal wastelands of the future, fighting nightmarish merging creatures, and jumping back in time to harvest souls as you seek to uncover the origins of the apocalypse that wiped out humanity. Like I said, a bit higher concept. And as it gears up to release later this week, and review embargoes just being lifted, we're gonna round up everything that critics are saying, the good, the bad, and the ugly, into one easy-to-process video. So sit back, relax, and let's take a look at the reviews for Cronos: The New Dawn. So, big picture, at the time of recording, Cronos sits at about a 78% on review aggregator site OpenCritic, giving it a healthy, strong rating, showing that most are enjoying it, though it's not quite blowing anyone away. The general vibe is that the world and atmosphere are impressive, and that the story is incredibly interesting, making it a great survival horror entry, though some feel that its gameplay may be a bit too derivative of other games in the genre that gets stale a bit too quickly, which may be a bit disappointing for fans of Silent Hill 2, hoping that Bloober Team would have back-to-back hits on their hands. Our own Game Rant review from Dalton Cooper puts it best, with quote, "Unfortunately, Cronos: The New Dawn does not live up to the ridiculously high bar set by the Silent Hill 2 remake, and is overall more in line with the studio's earlier projects." Dalton then goes on to talk about the game's narrative, calling the retro-futuristic world a quote, "utterly fascinating concept," though the execution does leave a lot to be desired, pointing directly to bland, one-note characters and a lack of emotional weight to the cutscenes. Another thing that our review notes is that if you're going into the game to be scared, you may be a bit disappointed, as Cronos is going for a more action-oriented approach, rather than eerie or unnerving. However, that shift in focus to action means that the combat and gameplay must be top-notch, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be the case, with Dalton describing the combat as serviceable but ultimately uninteresting. One other unique concept that's slightly undercooked is the merging system, where enemies absorb corpses and evolve into more dangerous versions of themselves, which our review states just didn't hit like it should because the game doesn't strike a good balance with it. Either players can easily run up and smack an enemy out of the merging animation, or they will be too overwhelmed with the sheer number of monsters in any given section, and so it becomes aggravating instead of tense and scary. Dalton then closes his review by saying that despite a rather unique story concept and a few clever ideas, Cronos: The New Dawn is a fairly run-of-the-mill survival horror game with a few key flaws that hold it back from being as good as its inspirations or Bloober Team's own Silent Hill 2 remake. But now, let's move on to what the rest of the industry thought of the game. Starting off with the good, many reviewers seem to thoroughly enjoy the game, despite it being a bit of the same song and dance as others in the genre, with Aaron Bain over at Push Square specifically saying that in a way it can lack originality, especially where gameplay is concerned. But what it does really well. And that was echoed by many other outlets, that Cronos has taken note of what works and doesn't work in the genre and refined it, with many particularly pointing to Resident Evil and Dead Space as the most direct inspirations, which, if you're a fan of those IPs, can be great news. CG Mag compares the gunplay directly to RE, saying that guns have weight, melee swings land heavily even when they're a last-ditch effort, but where Resident Evil eventually lets you feel like a one-person army, Cronos never does. It turns scarce supplies into a constant struggle. Several reviewers have also pointed out the superb sound design and attention to detail in the environment, Checkpoint Gaming even calling the game world awful in the best possible way. Walls are slimy with ooze and body parts protruding from them, buildings are abandoned and dilapidated, warning messages in Polish strewn across the walls in blood, corpses of creepy monsters are all over the place, and toxic growths explode when you go near them. Truly a horrific sight. But as far as the bad goes, many continue to point to the fact that Cronos doesn't do much of anything different than those other games before it. It's a generic survival horror game with a decent premise that isn't fully realized. And while some have enjoyed the challenging combat and slow burn story, others have called the gameplay aggravating and the story not living up to its full potential. Although one thing that almost every review has in common is that they specifically point out that the game isn't bad, it's actually a pretty good title, it's just not great, especially compared to all the great games that it borrows from, leaving it quite perfectly at around that 8 out of 10 mark or so, with a good 76% of critics recommending that you check the title out if interested. But that's actually about where we'll wrap up our little roundup. What do y'all think? Are you picking up Cronos The New Dawn when it releases? We're still undecided. Let us know down below, and thank you so much for watching.